Violence and aggressive behaviour from children towards their parents or carers is one of the biggest taboos in family life. It's the most hidden and misunderstood of the different forms of family violence. It is not included in European or national programmes on young people's violence, nor is it included in most of the programmes tackling domestic violence and violence against women and girls. In fact, in most European countries, this serious problem is only just starting to be acknowledged. So it is great thanks to the European Union and the Daphne III programme who funded this action research project, and that we've been able to explore child-to-parent violence within a European context for the first time. It's important to say at the outset that there is no universally accepted definition for child-to-parent violence and abuse, although Cottrell's definition is helpful. Any act of a child that is intended to cause physical, psychological or financial damage in order to gain control over a parent. Using action research, the Responding to Child-to-Parent Violence project implemented training and intervention programmes whilst evaluating and researching these. By using data mapping, self-efficacy questionnaires and qualitative interviews, this research addressed this knowledge gap by investigating practitioners, parents and carers and young people's knowledge and views on this serious problem.
Children of all ages can be abusive. This can take the form of abusive behaviour towards parents, grandparents, step-parents and siblings. This study recorded children as young as 5 being abusive. Because of the different way practitioners work with children and young people, the Action Research Project, Responding to Child-to-Parent Violence, decided to focus on adolescents.
We know from reports from parents and carers about physical violence and property damage that these are on the increase, as this data is recorded by the police. Emotional abuse and aggressive behaviour are more difficult to determine, as there's little agreement on how to capture this data.
In 2006, the European Youth Forum recognised the need for research and policy into child-to-parent violence and abuse. As a result, the Daphne III programme funded the Responding to Child-to-Parent Violence Action Research Project from 2013 to 2015. This study looked at whether violent and aggressive behaviour from children towards their parents or carers can be changed in 5 European countries: Spain, Sweden, Bulgaria, England and Ireland.
We were also aware that there is currently no evidence-based framework for the work with child-to-parent violence. With this in mind, we worked with the University of Brighton to put out a call across Europe and received 50 interested partners in this work.
The Responding to Child-to-Parent Violence project team was chosen from the applicants who best demonstrated a commitment to working with a community partner and a university to explore gender-based violence, and who were motivated to understand what child-to-parent violence meant in the specific context for their citizens.
NUI Galway wanted to be part of this project because we wanted to be able to research the problem of child-to-parent violence. It's a relatively new problem that people are talking about recently. We also wanted to pilot and research an intervention programme for parents living with child-to-parent violence, and also to raise the awareness in Ireland and beyond about this newly emergent problem. We were hoping also to learn from the experience of people in other countries in Europe about dealing with child-to-parent violence. What works in other countries, what can we learn from their experiences, and also what can we share with others as well.
In the beginning we didn't feel sure that this was relevant for us, but the very same day that we got the invitation, there was an incident with a 14-year-old girl who was threatening her mother with a knife. So then we started to discuss it, and the more we learned about it, the more interested we became.
Brighton and Hove City Council, together with Brighton University, wanted to explore whether or not Break for Change was effective. And in England particularly, there is lots of talk about an evidence-based programme.
The team has been built in a very collaborative way, and the experience has been just great.
What brings us all together is our belief, backed by emerging evidence, that although violence in early life can have detrimental impacts on young people and adults, nevertheless, with the right approach and the right intervention, this behaviour can be changed.
Our goals were
raise awareness of child-to-parent violence and abuse,
Research understanding and capture good practice.
Develop evaluation framework pilots with two models, Break for Change and Nonviolent Resistance.
Build capacity by implementing intervention programs.
Develop tools for practitioners and families.
Overall, we wanted to make sure that there was an emphasis on gender and violence against women.
We visited each other's countries, we used Skype, and we developed a live Twitter feed to connect all partners.
This, together with our interactive websites, enable us to gather people across Europe to take part and participate in our 2 national and 2 regional conferences.
We've developed 4 resource manuals, and our dynamic working practices have translated these into a living legacy for policymakers, practitioners, children and young people.
As a project team, we have all together developed our understanding of what child-to-parent violence is.
Each partner looked at their own country and looked at how the legislation and policy affected the way in which they deal with child-to-parent violence. This has been really helpful because it gave a baseline of how we can then work with child-to-parent violence during the project.
In Bulgaria, we trained 30 police officers and social workers. We held a round table discussing the young and children experience. Additionally, we carried out a children police academy in which we held talks with children about child-to-parent violence.
En gran medida, el problema de la violencia filioparental ha sido monopolizado por la culpabilización de la madre, en muchos de los casos, o la criminalización de la conducta del hijo, en muchos otros. Y esto deja de lado gran parte de la influencia socioeconómica, incluso la influencia cultural, que mucho tiene que ver en el desarrollo de este fenómeno.
In Europe, families are embedded in the different cultural, social, and political settings which vary from country to country. It is important to recognize the complexity of these forms and the power dynamics that exist in families today.
Gender and age seem to be important mediating systems of power between children and parents.
So bearing in mind the complexity of child-to-parent violence and the many forms that this abuse takes, the project team worked together with practitioners, policymakers, and families to dispel the misunderstandings that abound around this issue.
Our research has shown that families who experience child-to-parent violence and abuse come from a very wide diversity of backgrounds.
The impact on parents of CPV can be very serious indeed. It can include physical injuries, including broken arms, cuts, bruises, and worse. There are also a range of emotional impacts, including avoidance, denial, embarrassment, fear and anxiety, isolation, shame, disappointment, fatigue and despair. Young people can control their abusive behaviour. They can choose to use violent and abusive behaviour to control and disempower their parent.
It's when a child is behaving violently towards the parent on a regular basis, or when there's a constant threat of violence. So the key difference, I suppose, is, to normal behaviour is this fear factor that they talk about. It's when the parents are afraid of the child, when they're afraid to challenge the child or afraid to set down key rules in the house for fear of that child's reaction.
Parents may feel like this, but these kind of statements play into the mother-blaming and parent-blaming culture. As parents, we are responsible for the care of our children, but in the same way, children have to be responsible for their own behaviour. There is no evidence that violence is biologically inherited, rather it is actually learned behaviour. Some young people may have experienced trauma or loss. However, this is not an excuse for abusive behaviour. It is important that we look at those issues and really deeply work with those young people to ensure that their abusive behaviour is not used in future. We helped to train over 300 professionals in how to work with non-violent resistance and the Break for Change programme. This has been incredibly well received by practitioners.
Because there is a need for evidence-based interventions, we wanted to measure the impact of the training on practitioner self-efficacy. Self-efficacy refers to the knowledge, skills and values and to the practitioner's confidence in discussing this problem with parents and families.
The awareness of how we work with the different genders is important because this is the only way that we can ensure that our interventions will work effectively for families and prevent violence and abuse from happening.
One of the first things we mentioned was that in society, mothering versus quote-unquote fathering, that there's still an emphasis in society about mothers being good mothers and maybe not so much an expectation for fathers to be good fathers.
Shared learning, discussions and pan-European visits helped us all to develop new models of interventions and also to alter some of the interventions like non-violent resistance and Break for Change and enable countries to develop their own more effective interventions.
We trained a team of volunteers in the non-violent resistance programme. We initially trained 9 volunteers. I keep saying volunteers, I really think facilitator is a better term.
Having talked about it, we wanted a holistic approach. We knew that neither working with the parent on their own or the teenager on their own was going to work. It had to be something that both of them had to take responsibility for. So that's why we used the Power to Change. Also in relation to how we alter the content, as opposed to what Break for Change worked upon, we recognised the needs of our parents and children to be a little bit different. We had to Irishize the programme, so to speak. Karen would have talked about the teenagers having self-esteem so low that we couldn't process the content of the therapeutic sessions with them in the creative sessions. So actually it was a case of holding them and making them
making them feel okay to go home after discussing such a sensitive topic. With the parents, again, their confidence was so low that we had to concentrate on particular models that we actually went back to each time to discuss it and really reinforce those models that they found useful.
Mm-hmm. We've used the Nonviolent Resistance Programme for working with parents affected by child-to-parent violence. We got training in it in 2012, but we felt the need to adapt it into a group setting. So we work with groups of parents rather than one-to-one.
A key point in which we have been working within the project has been the development of a evidence-based tool for the assessment of the real impact and efficiency of the intervention, which is very important in the current situation of psychosocial interventions. We try to fight against a problem, but we also need to evaluate if what we have done or we are doing, it's really working well.
This project has evidenced how parents and young people talk about child-to-parent violence and abuse. They find it hard to believe that it's happening to them. They feel very embarrassed that they feel that they are unable to control their children. They often don't want to talk about it, so adding to the secrecy surrounding child-to-parent violence and abuse. This is why it's really so important for professionals and practitioners to break the silence surrounding child-to-parent violence and abuse.
I think for me the best thing about Break for Change has been being with other parents who've been in a similar situation, being able to be open and honest, to say it as it is, to not feel judged, to have that supported and feel safe by the facilitators. But it is, that peer support, I think.
Yeah, I felt quite alone, and I felt I just was in a dark corner, no one wanted to know me.
I felt alone because I didn't think anyone else was having the same experience, but now that I'm here, there's quite a lot of people.
It took me a long time to kind of recognise how bad things were for us as a family, and it wasn't just about how it was affecting me, but my other son as well, and how it was stopping us from just doing normal things and how isolated that we'd become. But it isn't just the physical. It's the emotional control. It's control over you actually, and that it can be so scared, and that's what's been very empowering about the group, to be able to recognise it and not to hold it in.
The best thing is meeting other people that have got similar problems, and it sort of puts your problems into perspective, even though yours to you are quite bad and personal. That the same applies to other people as well.
It's been really successful because it's kind of worked in an organic way. We haven't been told what to do, but there's been lots of information out there that we've kind of chosen to use and try out. And at the same time, the children are doing the same thing, so we've all been given a space to work things out and to try stuff all together, though, which has been the success, I think.
Of the young people we've actually talked to and heard about, these are the most common routes into child-to-parent violence and abuse. Cultural and gendered beliefs and attitudes, negative life experiences such as being the recipient of physical abuse, living with domestic violence and suffering other forms of trauma, learning difficulties, bidirectionality of violence, mental health problems, for example ADHD, parental drug or alcohol abuse, problems at school, lack of parental presence, commercialisation of society and a sense of entitlement. Child-to-parent violence and abuse poses a thorny social policy problem because it sits across a range of different policy areas: family policy, adult social care, children's policy, particularly child protection, antisocial behaviour, domestic violence, and violence against women and girls. The research found that responding to child-to-parent violence and abuse effectively requires specialised intervention programmes focusing on this form of family violence.
We also need well-informed and knowledgeable mainstream services, particularly in the statutory sector. These should include the police, health, social services and youth offending services as a minimum.
Child-to-parent violence and abuse is an unrecognised area for practitioners because although it does emerge in their casework, they tell us they find it very difficult to talk about children's violence in the family. Like us, the researchers Holt and Retford found that social workers struggle with the concept of children aggressing against their parents.
This project has particularly been keen in looking at how to raise awareness with practitioners and giving them training and development opportunities to enable them to be more effective in the way that they work with families where there is child-to-parent violence.
This is a new field of research and practice with a limited evidence base. We found very limited awareness, knowledge and understanding of child-to-parent violence and abuse across the European countries studied, although Spain was something of an exception to this. In England, in the Violence Against Women Action Plan, there is only one line relating to disseminating information on this subject more effectively. In other countries, there is no policy at all. This indicates to us that policymakers are key to recognising this issue and to developing local and national policies to address it more effectively. The idea that parents who are responsible for children's welfare can become the victims of abuse from their own child is an extremely challenging one. Not only for parents to acknowledge that it's actually happening in their family, but also for practitioners and for wider society to understand it. These findings alert us to the need for a programme of interventions and training for practitioners to be rolled out across Europe. Importantly, the public have a real need for awareness-raising campaigns to sensitise them to child-to-parent violence and abuse. Although this valuable project has given us great insight into child-to-parent violence and abuse, we're still at the beginning and there's still a long way to go. Both practitioners and academics are key to this vital and pressing work.
I see every day the change in us and how good our relationship is. Every time we mess up, recovering is so much quicker, so much better.
If you really want to fix it, you can.
start in building awareness, but also I love the whole concept of working as a team. That's what I love, the whole thing about working with different disciplines. And yeah, the other thing that strikes me as well is the whole respect element of it, respecting the individual, respecting the parents and the child, and the no blame in it is just, I think, massive, absolutely fantastic.
This conference complements the language that we use as systemic psychotherapists. We speak in non-judgmental terms. We are constantly looking for the resources within people, and this conference has helped us to think more laterally about that, and it's been a very broad and enriching experience, particularly in the context of thinking how RCPV uses other agencies, which is extremely important, I think, from the point of view of arriving at any solution to difficulties that we find in society.